as Christian was beaten and raped, then trapped inside a trash can. Her boyfriend, 23-year-old Christopher Newsom, was also raped before he was shot 3 times in his head, then lit on fire.
Peace and serenity blanket the world as dusk settles in. Yet in the creeping darkness, a chilling underworld stirs. As decent folk retire for the night, shadowy figures emerge with malevolence in their hearts. Predators lurk in plain sight, waiting to shatter the tranquility and prey on the vulnerable. When they strike, lives are irrevocably damaged and families are torn asunder. Such sinister events shock communities to their core. Knoxville, Tennessee was one such place ruptured by a savage crime. The victims were Channon Christian and Christopher Newsom, 2 young people brimming with promise and vitality. Their tender lives were cut short by an unthinkable act of cruelty. Though their names will be etched in tragedy, perhaps their legacy can illuminate the path to a more just world. This is the story of innocence betrayed, of evil unmasked. As the story unraveled, a startling picture emerged. 5 perpetrators were implicated, united by greed and a blatant disregard for human life. Their moral compass shattered. They sink into an abyss where no barbarity is beyond them. Their innocent captives pay the ultimate price. Hello guys, and welcome back to Crimeco, where we break down some of the most chilling true crime cases from every corner of the globe, providing you with the most recent and in-depth information. If this sparks your interest, we would be delighted if you could subscribe to the channel. Also, giving this video a like significantly supports the channel's growth. We appreciate your help. Now, grab a blanket to hide behind, and let's dive into today's interesting case. The tale begins in Knoxville, where life flows by at an easy pace. Folks are friendly but mindful of each other's space. The Tennessee River cuts through the heart of the city, spanned by bridges new and old. On weekends, Neyland Stadium fills with cheering football fans, but Knoxville has quietly kept a painful secret. Though nestled in verdant hills, parts of the city are scared by poverty and crime. Street gangs compete for territory, while the youth are lost to different substances. Still, many neighborhoods remain sheltered from this bleak world. Places like the Washington Ridge apartment complex on the western edge of town. It was here that Channon Christian and Chris Newsom crossed paths on a chill January night. She had driven over to meet Chris so they could attend a friend's birthday. Chris arrived to pick her up, and the two stood chatting in an embrace by her Toyota 4Runner. To passers-by, just another young couple stealing a private moment. But they were being watched. 5 figures hunched in a nearby car, and their gaze held dark intent. They were scouring the parking lot for a target, until they spotted Chris and Channon. The peaceful scene ignited something ugly in them. Before the couple knew it, 2 men approached with guns drawn. Chris and Channon were forced into her SUV at gunpoint. Their hands were tied, their eyes blindfolded. They begged to be let go as the vehicle raced off into the night. But their pleas fell on deaf ears. The 5 strangers had marked them for something sinister. The SUV came to a stop outside 2316 Chipman Street, on the other side of town. This rundown rental house was home to one of the abductors, a man named Lamarcus Davidson. He led the group, who now dragged their terrified captives inside. The other accomplices were Davidson's half-brother Latalvis Cobbins, along with Cobbins' girlfriend Vanessa Coleman and friend George Thomas. Also involved was a local man named Eric Boyd. Once in the house, their hellish ordeal began. Channon was confined to a bedroom while Chris was stuffed in the back of the SUV. At gunpoint, Channon was forced to call home and lie about her whereabouts. It was a sinister ploy to delay suspicion. Soon after, the SUV left with Chris inside. Channon remained captive, utterly alone except for her merciless tormentors. While Channon was trapped in the Chipman Street house, Chris was driven to nearby railroad tracks. Dragged from the SUV, he was forced to walk barefoot down the gravelly path. His elbows and ankles were tightly bound. A sock stuffed in his mouth muffled his cries. At an isolated spot, his captors halted. Chris was made to kneel as a gun was aimed at his hooded head. A deafening shot sliced the silence, but it did not end him. The bullet only paralyzed Chris as he slumped to the ground. Then came 2 more blasts to his back and neck. He lay convulsing on the cold gravel, clinging desperately to life. Finally, the gun barrel was placed point-blank against his head. A last, execution-style shot ended Chris's agony. But even in death, his torment wasn't over. The slayers doused his lifeless body with gasoline and set it ablaze. The righteous young man who only hours before had tenderly embraced his girlfriend was now abandoned beside the tracks, shot, burned, and discarded like trash. Back at the house, Shannon faced terrors of her own. Confined to a filthy bedroom, she was beaten, raped repeatedly, and defiled in unspeakable ways. Her ravaged and bloodied body bore witness to the vile depths her captors had sunk to. Shannon courageously clung to hope, telling the monsters she didn't want to die. But her pleading only earned her more brutality. Once the perpetrators returned from slaying Chris, Shannon was dragged into the living room. Her last hours were spent hog-tied on the cold floor, throat burning from bleach scrubbed inside it. At some point, Shannon's battered body was wrapped in garbage bags and stashed in a bin, left to slowly suffocate. By now, the merciless gang was celebrating their evil deeds, drinking beer and playing video games. On January 7th, the perpetrators dispersed from Chipman Street to evade the law. As word spread about the missing couple, dread gripped Knoxville. Chris and Shannon were beloved members of the community, known for their compassion and promise. Chris was a gifted craftsman who spent weekends fishing. The former baseball player dreamed of a simple life with Shannon, whom he adored. Shannon was universally admired for her kindness and beauty. A university student and sorority sister, she hoped to become a sociologist. She was the light of her parents' lives, their only child cherished for her vibrancy. Now the families faced an agonizing wait, praying for a miracle. As night fell again over Knoxville, their worst fears were confirmed. Chris' charred remains were found by the railroad tracks. The search for Shannon continued until her SUV was discovered, eliciting fresh horrors. Monday morning brought a devastating discovery. Officers entered the death house on Chipman Street and uncovered Shannon's mutilated body. Shockwaves rippled through Knoxville as grisly details emerged. 5 suspects were swiftly apprehended. As the investigation unfurled, their cavalier evil was laid bare. Even while the victims suffered next door, the gang had casually lounged around, downing beer and snacks. Not an ounce of remorse did they express for destroying 2 treasured lives. Yet, in an ironic twist, they decried the conditions of their own brief jail detention. The contrast between their petty complaints and the agony of Chris and Shannon's parents was staggering. They had lost their only children in the most barbaric fashion, while the slayers bellyached about small deprivations. The investigation reveals the intricate web of evidence that eventually implicated the 5 perpetrators. Print and DNA traces throughout the Chipman Street house tied the suspects to the crimes. Fingerprints on the trash bags enclosing Shannon's body matched Davidson and Cobbin's. Shoelaces used to bind Chris were traced to shoes in Davidson's closet. Shell casings from the railroad tracks matched a gun found in Davidson's possession. Most damning was the forensic proof. Sperm from Davidson and Cobbin's was found in Shannon's body, while prints marked with her blood were lifted from the house. Cell phone records also played a crucial role. Calls between Davidson and accessory Eric Boyd around the time of the carjacking strengthened the link between them. Later calls from Chris's phone, used by his slayers, charted their movements after the initial abduction. Any illusion of the suspect's innocence unraveled upon seeing where they partied immediately after the acts. Police searches uncovered more grisly souvenirs. A purse with Shannon's ID was found with the group during their arrest in Kentucky. In the Chipman Street rental, officers discovered Shannon's clothes along with photos of the couple defaced and burned, tokens kept as macabre trophies. The extent of the physical evidence overwhelmingly pointed to the guilt of all 5 accomplices. Tireless detectives pieced together a coherent timeline. Around 10:30 p.m. on January 6, Davidson and Boyd carjacked the couple at gunpoint outside Shannon's Toyota. They transported both victims to Chipman Street, where the evening's horrors commenced. After midnight, Chris was forced to the nearby railroad tracks, then ended execution style. Shannon remained captive at the house, enduring severe SA for hours until her end the next morning. By January 8, all 5 suspects had fled the area. 8 days later, the primary 4 perpetrators were captured in Kentucky on outstanding arrest warrants. The exhaustive investigation motto was "No stone left unturned," reflecting the meticulous effort to honor the victims. Seeking justice for Shannon and Chris was no straightforward affair. Knoxville united as one to mourn this devastating loss. The families displayed inspiring grace while honoring Chris and Shannon's memory. They formed foundations to support the victims' dreams and keep their spirits alive. Meanwhile, a lengthy quest for justice had only just begun. The legal process stretched on for over a decade through endless hearings, appeals, and retrials. Altogether, it spawned 7 separate trials and immeasurable anguish. But Shannon and Chris's loved ones persevered with steadfast dignity. They patiently turned up to every court date, reminding the system of the precious lives it had forgotten. In 2008, Eric Boyd was convicted of accessory charges and sentenced to 18 years in prison, which he continues serving. But the remaining 4 defendants faced extensive charges. Multiple juries imposed harsh punishments, including death for ringleader Davidson. However, revelations about the presiding judge raised doubts. Richard Baumgartner's struggling addiction compromised his fitness to oversee the trials. In 2011, his misconduct forced him off the bench and kick-started the exhausting cycle of appeals and do-overs. By 2013, some closure emerged. Litalvis Cobbins and George Thomas ultimately received life sentences with no parole. Vanessa Coleman had her conviction reduced but remained imprisoned for 35 years. Lamarcus Davidson sits on death row pending execution. The families continued advocating for justice. New laws passed in 2014 honoring Shannon and Chris addressed shortcomings. One allows juries to render verdicts without a judge's approval. Another restricts using victims' pasts against them in court. The legislation helped cement the couple's legacy of promoting societal good from terrible misfortune. Finally, in August 2019, the last suspect, Eric Boyd, was convicted on 36 charges for taking advantage of her and ending her. Relief swept Knoxville, knowing the 5 evil men involved were all behind bars at last. Boyd's 2019 sentence of life plus 90 years brought the epic case closer to a conclusion. While just outcomes proved elusive for years, Shannon and Chris are forever remembered as symbols of hope. Memorial scholarships in their names support students to pursue dreams cut short. Their eternally heartbroken families embody resilience in the face of unspeakable grief. Its legacy remains mixed but important. This shocking crime revealed some ugly tears in Knoxville's social fabric that needed mending. It also exposed flaws in the justice system, which generated new legislation to better support victims. The families even forgave those who showed remorse, recognizing that hate only breeds more hate. Mostly, this case spotlighted the tremendous loss when 2 good souls are extinguished. It should jolt us from complacency and remind us that evil lurks. We must confront the darkness and illuminate any neglected corners that allow ferocity to flourish. The memories of Shannon and Chris can guide us toward a more just and compassionate world. Though born out of horrific tragedy, their enduring story imparts critical lessons in human dignity, love, and the perseverance of hope. Perhaps that glimmer of hope, more than anything, honors their shortened lives. Where evil spreads its darkness, ordinary people can choose to carry the light. May we embrace that calling, for through hope and justice, the light shall overcome. Before you leave, please remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and click the notification bell. This will ensure you stay informed about the latest true crime cases we uncover. We're grateful to have you as part of our community as we explore the captivating mysteries that continue to fascinate us all. Stay curious and vigilant that even closed books still hold untold pages waiting patient revelation. Thank you for joining us, and we eagerly anticipate seeing you in our next exploration. Until next time.